Then in 1988, the Bank for International Settlements imposed Basel I, or the Basel Accords, Basel I, and that actually brought down the Japanese banks. Japan went through then what we're going through now, and it was all caused by this change in accounting rules, where instead of having 6% reserves or capital base, they suddenly had to have 8% capital. And because the Japanese banks tended to be less well capitalized than banks around the world, at that time they were the biggest creditors in the world. Like they were the dominant banks in the world, and they were brought down by just this change in rules, which made them then have more capital than they actually had, which meant suddenly they were undercapitalized, which meant they were bankrupt. And so the banks went bankrupt, and then the government had to step in and basically nationalize them. And they've been struggling ever since. They couldn't make loans, and therefore the real estate market shrank because nobody could get loans, and you see what's happened ever since there.
They hit them at a very vulnerable time, Ellen, when they had a colossal stock market and real estate bubble, where the value of Japanese real estate, I forget the comparison, but it was more valuable, I think, than the whole United States.
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, it really was a bubble. I guess it was the greatest real estate bubble ever. But the Japanese Nikkei, their Dow equivalent average, it topped out on the very last day of 1989 at just a shade under 39,000. And, a couple of months ago, it went down as low as 7,000. So here, 20 years later, and they still haven't come back.
Mm-hmm. And according to Bill Engdahl, it was actually, we actually precipitated that stock market crash. Anyway, by encouraging.
That was also the time when it was the Japan that could say no. So we took them down a peg in the 1980s as they grew more powerful. That was an expression I remember that went along, that went around, and that came crashing down. I remember when the Nikkei average was dropping like 1,000 points a day, and I didn't pay all that much attention at the time, but I was saying, what on earth is going on that's causing all this to happen? But boy, it sure did, and it just came down and down and down, and they had rallies, and it never got back into the 30,000s, I don't think, but it had rallies where they'd have a big, I guess, bear market rally, like we're going through now, and then we'll come back down again. So is this what our future will be? I wonder what you think of that, Ellen. Are we heading for a dark age, just like Japan?
I think that's the intent, that, or if you were a conspiracy theorist, that's what you would say the intent was we're the last domino to fall, the latest and greatest, the big one that they would have to bring down if they wanted to get us all tied into this private central banking system headed by the Bank for International Settlements with a global currency that we all have to borrow and beg, basically, and go into debt for. And the same thing happened to the U.S. banks. It was actually the BIS that precipitated this credit freeze just as they precipitated the one in Japan. I mean, by hindsight, people who support the rules say, well, it wasn't, it was a misjudgment or whatever, but maybe not. So in November 2007, in October 2007, the Dow hit its all-time high, went over 14,000. November 2007, the Bank for International Settlements changed the rules and said, now you have to value your books or your assets according to what they will fetch on the market, mark to market. In other words, you have to pretend that you're selling them today, even though in a real market you would sell them today. You'd hold on to them until there was a good market for them. So suddenly the banks did not have the capital that they needed to make loans, just as happened in Japan. So that's where this whole credit freeze started, and then the money wasn't available, and therefore the stock market and the real estate market collapsed. So we're going through the very same thing because of a rule imposed by the Bank for International Settlements.
when you say they or we had to do it, the real question is who are these people? From the start, maybe I'm not certain about the start. Once it became clear that we were in something more than a minor correction, Ellen, it just struck me that the powerful bankers, the big Wall Street bankers, they designed this themselves. And the scheme is just like past schemes, what they did to Japan, what they did to Southeast Asia in 1997, 98, crush economies, lower valuations on assets, and pick them up at fire sale prices. Mm-hmm. And it struck me that's exactly what they're doing now. Of course, they're hitting. I mean, this is a global thing. I don't know whether they wanted to make it as extreme as this is, because maybe their best laid plans won't come out the way they want them to. Who knows? But I think they absolutely wanted to cause trouble, eliminate competition, consolidate the banking industry, pick up other assets on the cheap, maybe the auto companies, that put them into bankruptcy, or at least a couple of them, and then pick them up for a song, invest in them. I don't think the banks want to become auto producers, but invest in the remaining hulks at a fraction of the value that they might have been if things had gone differently, but also consolidate the industry drastically and do it all with a friendly government, and don't bring back those nasty regulations like Glass-Steagall, and you'll go through a couple of tough years, and you'll come out of it being much stronger than you ever were before. So this is my idea of what they had in mind. How it's going to work out, I don't know.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's definitely the dark side, or where we could wind up. And then the question is, how do we escape that? And I think we have to set up our own. The first thing you have to realize is that, and that most people don't know, and that I didn't know until I started researching this book, that I started researching it actually in 2001, that banks do not lend their own money. They don't lend their depositors' money. They create the money on their books. Credit is just created on their books. So there's no reason that could not be a public function, and it should be a public function. It would work much better as a public function. The interest would go back to the government. It would relieve our tax burden, because that would be profits to the government, and the government would be in control of they could lend to themselves at very low interest rates, or even theoretically you could lend to yourself as a government at 0% interest and just pay the loan off out of the proceeds of whatever it was you built. In other words, you do it by double entry bookkeeping or accrual accounting, where you write the project on one side of your book, you write the amount of money it's going to take on the other side, and then you just draw on that account, pay your workers, pay your materials, and then whatever you built, let's say a dam that generates electricity, then the fees from the electricity go back to pay off the loan. Or let's say it was low-cost housing, then the rents from the housing goes back to pay off the loan. So it's just a question of where the credit originates. We think we have to go to this private bank that has a pile of money, but they don't have a pile of money. They just create that credit. We could just as well originate the credit ourselves, just as they do in North Dakota, and fund our own projects.
Oh, do we need it? We need another hour to spend discussing this more, which is the best reason I know that to get you back again to continue this, plus whatever new writing you do. But let's take a final break, Ellen, and we have a very short segment at the end, all too short. Such a big topic. We'll be right back.